Thomas Reed had dealt with his dog's digging habit for 3 years. Coastal storms, curious wildlife, even buried treasures that turned out to be driftwood. He'd seen it all. But when his Belgian Malinois, Copper, began obsessively excavating a specific patch of ground behind the Harborview Lighthouse, Thomas's annoyance turned to concern. The dog wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, just dug with manic intensity, his paws bleeding, his eyes wild with determination. Thomas tried everything to stop him, filled in the hole repeatedly, built a barrier, even considered consulting a veterinarian about obsessive behavior. But Copper always returned to that exact spot, a seemingly random area of packed earth 50 feet from the lighthouse foundation. No markers, no indication anything significant lay beneath, just dirt, rocks, and the dog's unwavering certainty that something below demanded discovery. On the 7th day, Thomas gave up fighting. He grabbed a shovel and told Copper, "Fine, we dig together. But when we find nothing, you're done with this nonsense." The dog's response was immediate, tail wagging, body vibrating with anticipation, positioning himself beside Thomas as they broke ground properly. 3 feet down, Thomas's shovel struck something that wasn't stone, something metal, something that rang with hollow resonance when tapped. Copper barked once, sharp and triumphant, then began digging with renewed frenzy. Thomas joined him, and within an hour they'd exposed what lay buried. A hatch. Industrial steel marked with symbols Thomas didn't recognize, sealed but not locked. A hatch that had been buried deliberately, hidden from discovery, waiting decades or perhaps centuries for someone to find it. What lay below would rewrite Harborview's entire history and force its 3,000 residents to confront a truth their ancestors had tried to bury. What do you think they found beneath that lighthouse? Share your theories in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. We love connecting with viewers from around the world. Copper had always been intense. Belgian Malinois are working dogs, bred for focus and determination, and Copper embodied those traits to an almost unsettling degree. Thomas had adopted him from a military working dog retirement program. The dog had served 2 tours detecting explosives, had saved countless lives, and deserved a peaceful retirement watching over a quiet coastal lighthouse. For 3 years, that arrangement had worked perfectly. Copper adapted to civilian life, found purpose in patrolling the lighthouse grounds, and seemed content with his new role as guardian of maritime safety rather than soldier. Thomas appreciated having a companion who understood duty, who didn't need constant entertainment, who was satisfied with simple routines and clear purposes. Then 3 weeks ago, everything changed. Thomas woke one morning to find Copper standing rigid in the yard, staring at a patch of ground behind the lighthouse with such intensity that Thomas initially thought a snake or dangerous animal was present. But there was nothing, just dirt, a few weeds, and Copper's unwavering attention. "What is it, boy?" Thomas had asked, approaching cautiously. Copper didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge Thomas's presence. He simply began digging, not playful excavation but purposeful, methodical work, as if following training protocols for something specific. Thomas filled in the hole that evening, dismissing it as odd behavior but nothing concerning. By morning, Copper had dug again, deeper this time, working through the night with such focus that he'd worn his paws raw. Thomas bandaged them, scolded gently, filled the hole again. The pattern continued. Every day, Copper dug. Every evening, Thomas filled the hole. The dog lost weight, his ribs beginning to show, despite Thomas ensuring he ate. He stopped his usual patrols, abandoned his favorite spots, ignored other wildlife. His entire existence had narrowed to a single purpose: dig at that specific location. Thomas consulted the lighthouse's historical records, searching for anything that might explain the fixation. Old foundations, buried utilities, previous structures. The records showed nothing. The lighthouse had been built in 1887 on bare rock and soil, with no previous construction on the site. He contacted the military program that had retired Copper, asking if the dog might be experiencing PTSD, if something about the location triggered traumatic memories. The handler was dismissive. Malinois don't fixate without reason. If Copper's digging there, he's detected something. These dogs don't make mistakes. By the 7th day, Thomas was desperate. Copper's condition was deteriorating. The dog barely slept, his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion, his paws infected despite constant cleaning and bandaging. Yet he wouldn't stop, couldn't stop. Whatever lay beneath that ground had claimed Copper's attention completely. Thomas made the decision standing in his kitchen at dawn, watching Copper through the window, watching the dog dig with mechanical precision despite obvious pain. He'd stop fighting. He'd help. Together, they'd find whatever Copper sensed, and then maybe the dog could finally rest. He grabbed his largest shovel and went outside. "All right, Copper, show me what you found. If this story has you hooked, consider subscribing to our channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps us share more incredible true stories like Thomas and Copper's discovery." Thomas had dug plenty of holes in his lighthouse keeping career, installing posts, planting gardens, burying cables. But digging with purpose, with a dog as a partner, with the certainty that something significant waited below, transformed the labor into something almost ceremonial. Copper supervised every shovelful, his attention absolute, occasionally barking corrections when Thomas veered from the optimal digging pattern. The dog's precision was eerie. He'd indicate exact angles, specific depths, as if reading a map Thomas couldn't see. Military training, Thomas reminded himself. Explosive detection required extraordinary spatial awareness. The first foot yielded only soil and small rocks. Standard coastal ground, nothing unusual. Thomas began doubting again, wondering if he was enabling canine obsession rather than following genuine instinct. But Copper's confidence never wavered, and something in the dog's demeanor, the way he watched, the way he positioned himself, communicated absolute certainty. At 2 feet, the soil changed, became more compact, more deliberately packed, mixed with substances that shouldn't naturally occur together. Thomas recognized the signs. This ground had been disturbed before, filled intentionally, compressed to conceal what lay beneath. Someone had buried something and tried to make it invisible. "You were right, boy," Thomas murmured, his shovel biting deeper. Copper's tail wagged once, conserving energy but acknowledging the validation. At 3 feet, metal rang against metal. Thomas's shovel had struck something solid, something that echoed hollowly when struck. He cleared dirt more carefully now, exposing edges, tracing the outline of what Copper had found. A hatch, circular, maybe 4 feet in diameter, made from steel that had survived decades underground with minimal corrosion. Quality construction, built to last. The hatch's surface bore markings Thomas didn't recognize. Not quite letters, not quite symbols, arranged in patterns that suggested language, but not any language he'd encountered. Some looked vaguely nautical, reminiscent of old maritime charts. Others seemed mathematical, geometric precision serving purposes Thomas couldn't determine. Copper approached the exposed hatch and placed his paw on it, not scratching, not digging, but deliberately touching, as if confirming identity. The dog looked at Thomas with unmistakable communication. "Open it." "Should I?" Thomas asked aloud, suddenly hesitant. Whatever was below had been buried for a reason, sealed, hidden. The people who'd concealed this hatch had gone to considerable effort, had wanted it unfound. Opening it might release something better left contained. But Copper was insistent, barking now, pawing at the hatch's edge, where a recessed handle had been incorporated into the design. The dog wasn't detecting danger, he was detecting discovery, something meant to be found by the right individual at the right time. Thomas examined the handle mechanism. No lock, no obvious security measures, just a simple lever design requiring strength to operate. Whoever had sealed this expected it to be opened eventually, but only by someone strong enough to handle what lay below. Thomas grasped the handle with both hands, braced his feet and pulled. The hatch resisted, decades of settling making the seal tight. But military-grade construction meant functionality endured. With a groan of metal on metal, the hatch began to move. Beneath it, a ladder descended into absolute darkness. And from that darkness rose air that hadn't been breathed in generations. Cold, stale, carrying scents of paper and salt and time. Thomas fetched a flashlight from the lighthouse, returning to find Copper sitting patiently beside the open hatch, staring down into the darkness with focused attention. The dog hadn't descended alone, hadn't investigated independently. He was waiting for his partner, maintaining the protocol that had defined their relationship. They faced unknowns together. "Good boy," Thomas said, scratching behind Copper's ears. "We go together, but if anything seems dangerous, we retreat. Understood?" Copper's response was to place his front paws on the ladder's top rung, demonstrating both capability and readiness. The ladder was solid, iron rungs bolted into concrete walls, engineered for durability rather than comfort. Thomas descended first, testing each rung, his flashlight revealing a vertical shaft approximately 20 feet deep. Copper followed, his claws clicking against metal, his movements surprisingly graceful for a dog navigating human-designed equipment. They emerged into a chamber that defied Thomas's expectations. Not a crude basement or storage cellar, but a sophisticated space, roughly 40 feet square, with concrete walls covered in maps, charts, and photographs. Electric lights hung from the ceiling, dormant but present, suggesting this space had been designed for extended occupation. Thomas found a switch panel near the ladder base and hesitated. Would power still function after decades? But the wiring looked professional, possibly connected to the lighthouse's main systems. He flipped a switch, and fluorescent lights flickered to life, illuminating a room that had been waiting in darkness for an incomprehensible length of time. The space was a command center. That's what Thomas's mind kept insisting as he surveyed the contents. Multiple desks arranged in a semicircle, each equipped with now obsolete radio equipment, plotting tools, navigational instruments. Filing cabinets lined one wall, their drawers labeled with dates and codes. A large chart table dominated the room's center, its surface covered with a detailed map of Harborview's coastline. But not the coastline as it existed now. This map showed features that no longer existed, marked locations that had been removed from modern maps. Copper moved through the space with purpose, leading Thomas to specific areas, indicating items of importance. The dog stopped beside a desk where a journal lay open, its last entry dated November 13th, 1962. Thomas read the handwriting, neat, controlled, professional. Final entry. The operation concludes tonight. All evidence has been sealed, all participants sworn to silence. The town must never know what we prevented, what still lies dormant. Future lighthouse keepers will be chosen carefully, vetted for qualities that might allow discovery if circumstances warrant. We pray such circumstances never arise. But if you're reading this, Keeper, if your companion led you here, then the situation we feared has manifested. Follow the protocols exactly. Trust your dog. They see what we cannot. Thomas's hands trembled. What operation? What had been prevented? And what lay dormant that might require future intervention? Copper barked sharply, drawing attention to another section of the chamber where a steel door waited, marked with a single word in faded paint: Archive. Whatever secrets Harborview's ancestors had buried, the full truth waited behind that door. The archive door wasn't locked, but sealed, a pressure mechanism requiring specific release procedures. Thomas found instructions posted beside it, step-by-step directions for opening without damaging contents within. Whoever had designed this chamber anticipated future access but wanted to ensure proper handling. The seal broke with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and the door swung open to reveal floor-to-ceiling filing cabinets, document boxes, and sealed containers marked with handling warnings. This wasn't just an archive, it was a vault, preserving materials too sensitive for normal storage, too important to destroy. Thomas pulled the first file at random. Inside, photographs of Harbour View from the 1940s, but the images showed structures that didn't exist in any historical record he'd seen. A large concrete facility near the harbour, guard towers, military vehicles, hundreds of personnel in naval uniforms working on equipment Thomas didn't recognize. During World War II? Thomas muttered, but the dates were wrong. The photographs spanned from 1947 to 1962, well after the war ended, and the facility's purpose wasn't clear from the images alone. He pulled another file. Technical schematics for underwater detection equipment, experimental sonar arrays, acoustic monitoring systems. The designs were decades ahead of what Thomas knew existed in that era, marked with classification stamps and project names that meant nothing to him. Operation Deepwatch, Project Threshold, Sentinel Protocol. Copper had found something else, a box marked Personnel Files. Inside were dossiers on Harbour View residents, but not all residents. Only specific families, tracked across generations, noting particular traits. Sensitivity to low-frequency sounds, unusual perceptual abilities, instances of anomalous awareness. Each file included photographs and detailed records, as if these families had been studied, monitored. Thomas recognized names, current Harbour View residents, his neighbors, the mayor, the harbour master. Their parents and grandparents documented in these files, marked as subjects in some long-term observational study. His hands found another section, incident reports, dozens of them, spanning from 1947 to 1962, describing events the modern town had no record of. November 1949, acoustic anomaly detected at 0.3 Hz, duration 7 minutes, source undetermined. March 1952, 3 civilian reports of underwater lights, investigation inconclusive, witnesses discredited. August 1958. Sensor array detected massive submerged movement, no biological or mechanical explanation, deep watch protocols activated. The reports escalated in frequency and severity through the early 1960s, culminating in a series of entries from October-November 1962 that made Thomas's blood run cold. Object approaching from deep trench. Sensor arrays at maximum capacity. Evacuation protocols prepared. Contact established. Contact with what? The final report, dated November 13th, 1962, the same date as the journal entry above, stated simply, agreement reached. Object returning to depth. Monitoring continues indefinitely. Town must remain unaware. Future protocols activated. Copper barked, pulling Thomas from the documents to another door at the archive's far end. This one was marked differently, with hazard symbols and a placard reading, Observation Room, authorized personnel only, active monitoring required. Through a small window in the door, Thomas could see screens still glowing, equipment still functioning, continuing whatever watch had been established 60 years ago. Someone, or something, was still being monitored. The observation room hummed with active electronics, a sound Thomas recognized from his Coast Guard days, the white noise of equipment maintaining constant vigilance. But this technology was operating decades beyond its reasonable lifespan, as if something had preserved it, kept it functional through sheer necessity. 3 large screens dominated the far wall, each displaying real-time data. The first showed sonar readings of Harbour View's coastal waters, sweeping in regular patterns, searching depths that commercial vessels never reached. The second displayed acoustic waveforms, monitoring frequencies at the extreme low end of detection, sounds below human hearing, but apparently significant. The third showed a depth chart of the offshore trench, marked with a single pulsing indicator 12,000 feet down. The indicator was moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely ascending. Thomas's stomach tightened. Whatever this equipment monitored, whatever agreement had been reached in 1962, the situation was changing. The object, entity, presence, whatever it was rising from the depths where it had remained dormant for 60 years. A logbook beside the screens contained entries in different handwriting, dated sporadically over decades. Thomas recognized the pattern. Lighthouse keepers maintaining watch. Not all keepers, only specific ones, selected for reasons the personnel file suggested. His predecessor had made entries. So had the keeper before that. A chain of watches extending back to 1962, each recording the indicator's position, noting any changes. The entries showed a pattern Thomas found both reassuring and terrifying. The indicator had remained essentially stationary at 12,000 feet for decades, moving only slightly, perhaps circling or shifting position, but never ascending, until 3 weeks ago. The dates matched Copper's obsession. When the dog had started digging, the indicator had started rising. Copper had sensed it. Somehow, the dog had detected changes in acoustic frequencies, pressure waves, something imperceptible to human senses, but unmistakable to canine perception. He'd been trying to alert Thomas, trying to lead him here, trying to ensure the watch continued. Thomas found operational protocols in a binder marked Critical Procedures. The instructions were clear. If the indicator rose above 10,000 feet, specific notifications were required. Contact numbers for government agencies, military liaisons, individuals whose names Thomas didn't recognize, but whose authority was emphasized repeatedly. The indicator was currently at 9,800 feet, rising approximately 20 feet per day. Thomas did the math. At current rate, whatever was down there would reach surface depth in approximately 60 days. Less than 2 months before the agreement established in 1962 would be tested, before Harborview would face whatever its ancestors had successfully negotiated into dormancy. He reached for the radio equipment, intending to follow protocols, contact the listed authorities. But his hand froze when he saw the status indicators. The communication systems had been severed, not broken, deliberately disabled. Someone had cut Harborview's connection to whatever network had supported this operation, had isolated the town, had ensured that when the indicator reached the surface, Harborview would face it alone. Copper growled, a sound Thomas had rarely heard from the normally composed dog. The growl wasn't directed at the screens or the indicator, but at a realization both of them were reaching simultaneously. Someone wanted this discovered now, at this specific moment when response options were limited. Thomas and Copper weren't just discovering history. They were being positioned as participants in something that had been orchestrated decades in advance. Thomas spent hours in the observation room, reading through decades of logs, piecing together Harborview's hidden history. The truth was almost impossible to accept, yet the evidence was undeniable. The town had been founded as a cover operation, its entire existence built around monitoring something in the offshore trench. The earliest documents dated to 1887, the lighthouse's construction year, but also the year something had been detected in the deep waters offshore. Naval expeditions, geological surveys, scientific missions had all noted anomalies. Acoustic signals with mathematical patterns, lights at impossible depths, disturbances that suggested massive submerged structures. The government's response was to establish permanent monitoring disguised as a civilian coastal community. Harborview's founding families weren't random settlers. They were selected participants, military personnel, scientists, and their families relocated under civilian identities. The town's layout, its infrastructure, even its industries, were designed to support the monitoring operation while appearing normally functional. The cannery processed fish, but also housed sensor equipment. The harbour accommodated fishing boats, but also covert research vessels. The lighthouse guided maritime traffic, but also served as the command centre for deep-water surveillance. For 60 years, 1887 to 1947, the operation was purely observational. Whatever existed in the trench remained dormant, unresponsive to monitoring attempts, content to be watched without interaction. Then, in 1947, something changed. The acoustic signals intensified, the lights became more frequent, and in August 1947, for the first time, there was response, an acknowledgement that the monitoring was perceived, that whatever dwelled below was aware of the watchers above. The government escalated the operation, bringing in advanced technology, expanding the facility, increasing personnel. The goal shifted from observation to communication. Between 1947 and 1962, increasingly sophisticated attempts were made to establish contact, to determine the nature of what occupied the trench, to assess threat level. The breakthrough came in October 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. While the world focused on nuclear tensions, something else was happening in Harborview's waters. The entity in the trench had detected the increased military activity, the submarine movements, the acoustic signatures of potential conflict. It had risen to 4,000 feet, the closest it had ever come to the surface, and had initiated contact. The logs from that period were fragmentary, marked with classification stamps Thomas's clearance wouldn't have authorized even during his Coast Guard service. But the implications were clear. An agreement had been reached. The entity agreed to return to depth, to remain dormant in exchange for something. The logs never specified what, but the timing was significant. The crisis ended, tensions de-escalated, and the entity descended back to 12,000 feet, where it had remained until 3 weeks ago. Thomas found a sealed envelope in the binder, marked "For Future Keeper." Inside, a letter addressed to no one specifically, but clearly intended for whoever discovered this chamber. The handwriting matched the final journal entry upstairs. "If you're reading this, the agreement is failing. The entity is rising. We don't know why it remained dormant or what might trigger renewed activity, but we established protocols for this scenario. The town must be told. The families must be prepared, and most critically, the entity must not be met with hostility. Contact was peaceful. It must remain peaceful." Thomas folded the letter carefully. Then he looked at Copper, the dog who'd sensed the crisis before any human could, and said, "We need to talk to the mayor." Margaret Torres had been Harborview's mayor for 8 years, a position her family had held on and off for generations. When Thomas called requesting an emergency meeting, her immediate response, "Did you find the chamber?" confirmed what he'd suspected. Some residents knew the truth, had been waiting for this moment. They met in her office after hours, with Thomas bringing selected documents and Copper as witness. Margaret's expression as she reviewed the materials was complex. Relief mixed with dread, recognition mixed with fear. "My grandmother told me stories," Margaret said quietly. "I thought they were family legends, exaggerations, stories about the government facility, about something in the ocean, about agreements and watchers. She said when the time came, the lighthouse keeper would know what to do. I didn't believe it, didn't want to believe it. The indicator is rising," Thomas said. "Whatever your grandmother's stories were about, it's happening now. And the communication systems have been severed. We're isolated." Margaret closed the documents, her hands trembling slightly. How many people know the truth? Based on the personnel files, maybe a dozen families, those descended from the original operation members, but that's assumptions based on 60-year-old documents. Current knowledge could be much more limited. Or more widespread, Margaret countered. Some families maintain oral histories. My grandmothers weren't the only stories. The harbour master's grandfather, the cannery owner's mother, they all mentioned the agreement of the watcher and things we dismissed as old person rambling. Thomas leaned forward. The protocols say the town must be told. But how do we tell 3,000 people their entire history is a cover story? That something unidentified has been living in the trench offshore? That an agreement made in 1962 is apparently failing? We don't tell them everything, Margaret decided, her mayor's instincts engaging. Not yet. First, we confirm who knows what. Gather the families descended from operation members. See if anyone maintained knowledge, protocols, contingency plans their ancestors might have passed down. Copper barked once, sharp and insistent. The dog had positioned himself facing the window, toward the ocean, his body language indicating he sensed something changing. Thomas checked his phone. 9:47 p.m. According to the logs, acoustic activity typically intensified after dark when ocean traffic diminished and detection became easier. The next monitoring check was scheduled for midnight. I need to be at the observation room. I'm coming with you, Margaret said. If my family was part of this operation, I should understand what they were watching, what they sacrificed normalcy to monitor. They drove to the lighthouse in Margaret's car, copper alert in the back seat, the town around them peaceful and oblivious. Harborview's residents went about their evening routines, restaurants closing, families at home, teenagers at the beach, unaware that beneath their inherited normalcy, their ancestors had maintained a secret vigil for generations. The observation room's screens told a story that made both Thomas and Margaret catch their breath. The indicator had jumped. Not the gradual 20 feet per day rise, but a sudden ascent of 300 feet. It was at 9,500 feet now, and the acoustic sensors were registering intense low-frequency activity. Whatever was down there had accelerated its approach. Time was running out faster than anyone had calculated. Margaret spent the next 24 hours discreetly contacting Harborview's founding families, using careful language about historical matters requiring discussion. The response was telling. 14 families immediately understood the significance, confirming they'd maintained some level of ancestral knowledge. They gathered in the lighthouse after dark, 23 adults whose bloodlines traced back to the original operation. Thomas and Margaret briefed them in the observation room, showing the evidence, explaining the current situation. The reactions ranged from shock to validation. Those who'd heard family stories now had confirmation, while others were learning their heritage for the first time. My grandfather was a sonar operator, said James Chen, the harbour master. He told me about the October '62 incident, said they'd made contact with something intelligent, something that had been down there for ages. He described it as a presence rather than a creature, vast, aware, patient. He said the agreement was simple, we don't threaten it, and it doesn't surface. So what changed? Asked Elena Martinez, whose family owned the cannery. Why is it rising now? Thomas pulled up recent naval activity reports he'd accessed through Coast Guard contacts. 3 months ago, deep-sea mining exploration began 200 miles offshore. Private contractors using new acoustic imaging technology, mapping the trench system, conducting seismic surveys. The frequencies they're using are incredibly powerful, designed to penetrate miles of ocean and rock. The implications settled over the group like cold water. The entity had been awakened not by any deliberate provocation, but by commercial activity, by companies pursuing profit without any awareness of what slept in those depths. We need to stop the mining operation, someone said. On what grounds? Margaret countered. We can't explain the real reason without sounding insane, and even if we could, the companies have legal permits, international backing. They're not violating any known regulations. Then we deal with the entity directly, James suggested. The logs say contact was established in 1962. If they communicated once, maybe they can again. Thomas had considered this but was uncertain. The equipment for contact was dismantled after the agreement. All that remains is monitoring capability. Even if we wanted to communicate, I'm not sure how. Copper, who'd been lying quietly near Thomas's feet, suddenly stood and barked. 3 sharp barks that everyone in the room recognized as deliberate communication. The dog moved to a cabinet Thomas hadn't yet opened, pawing at it insistently. Inside, communication protocols, equipment specifications, and a handwritten note. Communication array was never dismantled. It was concealed. To activate, follow the acoustic beacon Copper will show you. The dogs know, they've always known, trust your companion. The room fell silent as the full implication became clear. Copper hadn't just led Thomas to the chamber through superior senses. The dog was part of a lineage of canine watchers, bred or trained or somehow selected to maintain continuity of knowledge across generations, to ensure that when the crisis came, the human keepers wouldn't face it blind. "Show us, Copper," Thomas said quietly. The dog was already moving toward the exit, leading them to secrets even the original operators hadn't fully documented. Copper led them beyond the observation room, through a section of the underground complex Thomas had assumed was only storage. The dog navigated corridors with absolute certainty, stopping at what appeared to be a solid concrete wall. But when Thomas examined it closely, he found seams, a hidden door perfectly camouflaged, equipped with a pressure release mechanism that Copper somehow triggered by pawing specific points in sequence. Behind it, a chamber larger than any they'd seen before, dominated by equipment that seemed too advanced for 1962 technology. Not conventional radio arrays, but something else. Crystalline structures interfaced with electronics, acoustic generators arranged in geometric patterns, display screens showing waveforms that operated across frequency ranges Thomas didn't recognize from standard communications equipment. "This is alien technology," Elena whispered, but James disagreed. "No. This is human engineering informed by something else. Look at the construction. It's our materials, our power systems. But the design principles aren't entirely ours. I think the entity taught us how to build this. Shared enough knowledge to enable communication." Documentation confirmed James's theory. The communication array had been constructed during the contact period of 1962, designed through collaborative effort between human engineers and transmitted instructions from the entity. It wasn't built to transmit human language, but to translate intent, emotion, and concept into frequencies the entity could perceive and respond to. Thomas found the activation sequence, carefully preserved in laminated instructions. The array requires a human operator and a canine companion. Human consciousness provides content. Canine perception provides the frequency modulation necessary for the entity to comprehend. Together they form a complete transmission system. Margaret looked at Thomas and Copper. "You two have to be the ones. The operation logs show it was always a keeper and their dog. That pairing isn't random, it's functionally necessary." Thomas sat at the operator's station while Copper positioned himself in a designated space beside the chair. The dog's body relaxed, but alert. The array activated automatically, responding to their presence, crystalline structures beginning to glow with soft luminescence that pulsed in rhythm with Copper's breathing. Thomas placed his hands on the interface panels and immediately felt the connection. Not mechanical, but organic, the equipment responding to his neural activity, translating his thoughts into acoustic patterns. Copper's role became clear. The dog was filtering, modulating, adjusting frequencies to ranges the entity would recognize as communication rather than threat. Thomas formed his thoughts carefully. We are the watchers, the agreement holders. We seek to understand why you rise. We mean no harm. We remember the peace established. The response came not as sound, but as sensation, transmitted through the array and experienced simultaneously by everyone in the chamber. Vast awareness acknowledging them, ancient patience, and underneath it all, disturbance, pain, a request communicated in concepts rather than words. The mining operations were causing suffering. The acoustic bombardment was intolerable. The entity wasn't rising to threaten, it was rising to escape agony. It needed the humans to stop the noise, end the assault, or it would be forced to surface and silence the source directly, which would mean destroying the mining platforms and possibly every vessel in the surrounding waters. Harborview had 72 hours to prevent catastrophe. Thomas and Margaret worked through the night, coordinating with the families who now understood the stakes. They couldn't stop the mining operations through legal channels in 72 hours, but they could leverage something more powerful: public attention and strategic disruption. James used his harbormaster authority to issue safety warnings about the mining area, citing unusual acoustic activity and potential hazards to marine life. Elena contacted environmental groups, providing data from the monitoring equipment that showed ecological disturbance. Technically true, even if the full context was concealed. Margaret reached out to media contacts, framing the mining operation as a threat to the coastal ecosystem. Within 48 hours, news crews descended on Harborview. Environmental protesters arrived. The story gained traction on social media. Deep-sea mining threatens pristine marine environment. The mining companies found themselves defending operations before anyone had realized what was truly at stake. Thomas and Copper maintained communication with the entity through the array, providing updates, requesting patience. The entity's responses suggested understanding. It recognized their efforts, appreciated the attempted intervention. But the suffering continued. The acoustic bombardment hadn't stopped, only paused. Time was running out. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A marine biologist investigating the protesters' claims detected anomalies in the acoustic data. Not just environmental disruption, but response patterns suggesting intelligence, communication structure, mathematical organization, impossible in known marine species. She contacted Thomas directly, asking questions that revealed she was close to understanding the truth. Thomas made a decision Margaret later called either brilliant or reckless. He told her everything, showed her the chamber, the equipment, the communication array, let her experience contact with the entity through the array's interface. She emerged from the experience transformed, converted instantly from skeptic to advocate. Her subsequent research paper, published online with explosive speed, provided scientific framework for what Harborview's families had known. Intelligent life existed in the deep trenches, communication was possible, and current industrial activities threatened not just ecology, but first contact protocols. The paper went viral. Scientists worldwide debated its claims. The mining companies faced unprecedented pressure. And critically, their investors, terrified of potential liability if the claims proved even partially true, suspended operations pending further investigation. The acoustic bombardment stopped. The entity began descending, returning to the depths where it had dwelt peacefully for decades. Thomas and Copper communicated gratitude through the array and received response, acknowledgement, appreciation, and a request to continue the watch, continue the guardianship that had protected both species for so long. Harborview's families gathered in the lighthouse one final time. They agreed to formalize the knowledge, establish official protocols, ensure future generations understood their heritage and responsibility. The town would remain a guardian post, watching over the entity that watched over the depths. Thomas stood with Copper on the lighthouse gallery, watching sunset paint the ocean in gold and crimson. "Good work, partner," he said, scratching behind the dog's ears. Copper leaned against his leg, tail wagging slowly, satisfied with a duty fulfilled and a town saved. Below them, in the chamber system only they could access, the monitoring equipment hummed its eternal vigilance. The watch continued, as it had for generations, as it would for generations to come.